In the small town of Crestwood Heights, life moved at a slow pace. People knew each other by name, and the streets were quiet most nights. But beneath this peaceful surface, tensions simmered. Tensions that would soon boil over into something no one saw coming. Officer Greg was one of those familiar faces you'd see around town. He had been on the force for over 15 years and prided himself on keeping things in order. To some, he was just another cop doing his job. But to others, especially people of color in the community, Officer Greg carried a reputation. It wasn't loud or obvious, at least not to those who didn't experience it firsthand. But it was there. His tone shifted when talking to certain individuals. His patience seemed thinner, and his actions often bordered on aggressive. One evening, as the sun began to set behind the trees, Officer Greg was patrolling near Maple Park. The park was usually empty after dark, so spotting someone walking alone caught his attention. From a distance, he noticed a young man sitting on a bench scrolling through his phone. Nothing about the scene looked unusual, but Officer Greg decided to pull over anyway. As he approached the man, his flashlight beam cutting through the dim light, Officer Greg asked him what he was doing there. The man calmly explained that he was waiting for a friend, but instead of accepting the answer, Officer Greg pressed further. He demanded identification and started asking intrusive questions. When the man hesitated, saying he hadn't done anything wrong, Officer Greg's demeanor changed entirely. What happened next shocked even the seasoned officer himself, not because of what he did, but because of who the man turned out to be connected to. You see, this wasn't just any random person sitting in the park. This man was secretly dating Police Chief Laura Reynolds. Their relationship had been kept under wraps for months, hidden from public view to avoid drama and potential backlash. Neither of them imagined that their private lives would collide with work in such a disastrous way. But Officer Greg didn't know any of this yet. All he saw was someone whose presence irritated him, someone he thought he could intimidate. So, without hesitation, he slapped handcuffs on the man and shoved him into the back of his patrol car. There was no valid reason for the arrest, no crime committed, no evidence of wrongdoing. Just Officer Greg acting on impulse, fueled by prejudice and arrogance. It was during this heated moment that things took an even darker turn. As the man sat in the back seat trying to stay calm, Officer Greg leaned closer and said something chilling. "You think you're untouchable? Let me tell you something, you're not." What followed was a bizarre mix of threats and accusations, all laced with racial undertones. Officer Greg made it clear that he believed the man didn't belong in his town. But here's where the story gets interesting. Unbeknownst to Officer Greg, the man had already started recording everything on his phone. Every word, every threat, it was all being captured. And when Officer Greg demanded money in exchange for letting him go, the man didn't argue. Instead, he agreed to play along, knowing full well that the recording would serve as undeniable proof of corruption and misconduct. Later that night, once free from Officer Greg's grasp, the man rushed to meet Police Chief Laura Reynolds. He told her everything: the unjustified stop, the handcuffs, the threats, and the demand for money. At first, she couldn't believe what she was hearing. How could one of her own officers behave this way? But then she listened to the recording. Her heart sank as she heard Officer Greg's voice, filled with venom and contempt. She realized this wasn't just about her personal life anymore. This was about accountability, justice, and the integrity of the entire police department. For Police Chief Laura, this was a nightmare scenario. On one hand, she wanted to protect the man she cared about deeply. On the other hand, she knew she had a responsibility to uphold the law, even if it meant exposing her own vulnerabilities. After hours of deliberation, she made a decision. She would report the incident to Internal Affairs, providing them with the recording as evidence. It was a risky move, one that could cost her career and reputation, but she felt it was the only right thing to do, and so the wheels of justice began to turn. Little did anyone know, this single incident would spark a chain reaction, uncovering years of buried secrets and forcing the town of Crestwood Heights to confront uncomfortable truths about race, power, and accountability. What started as a routine night patrol had become the catalyst for change, or chaos, depending on how you looked at it. After the shocking incident in the park, the young man couldn't shake off what had happened. He felt angry, violated, and scared all at once. But he also knew that staying silent wasn't an option. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was bigger than that. So, with his hands still trembling slightly from the adrenaline, he reached out to Police Chief Laura Reynolds, the person who meant the most to him, but also someone who held immense power in the situation. When they finally met later that night, the air between them was heavy. The man recounted every detail of the encounter, how Officer Gregg had stopped him without cause, how he'd been handcuffed like a criminal, and how the threats had escalated into outright blackmail. As he spoke, Laura listened intently, her face growing paler with each word. She wanted to believe this was some kind of misunderstanding, but deep down she knew better. Her gut told her this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. Then came the moment when the man played the recording for her. Sitting in her living room, Laura pressed play on his phone, her heart pounding as she heard Officer Gregg's voice. The venom in his tone sent chills down her spine. It wasn't just the racial slurs or the blatant abuse of power. It was the sheer arrogance in his voice, as if he thought he was untouchable. And then there was the demand for money. Hearing it all unfold made her sick to her stomach. For Laura, this was personal, not only because the victim was someone she deeply cared about, but also because it exposed cracks in the foundation of the police department she had sworn to lead with integrity. She had always tried to maintain professionalism, keeping her private life separate from her job. But now those two worlds were colliding, and she had no choice but to face the consequences head-on. Laura spent hours pacing back and forth in her home that night, replaying the recording in her mind. She knew what needed to be done, but the weight of the decision pressed heavily on her shoulders. Reporting this to Internal Affairs meant opening herself up to scrutiny. People would question her motives, wondering if she was acting out of bias or revenge. Some might even accuse her of using the incident to protect her secret relationship. But despite these risks, she couldn't ignore the truth staring her in the face. This wasn't just about her. It was about justice, accountability, and setting an example for the entire department. The next morning, Laura took a deep breath and walked into the Internal Affairs office. She handed over the recording and explained everything: the arrest, the threats, the attempted extortion. Her voice wavered at times, but her resolve never faltered. She emphasized that this wasn't just about one bad apple. It was about addressing systemic issues within the force. If left unchecked, incidents like this could destroy the fragile trust between law enforcement and the community. Internal Affairs agreed to launch an investigation, promising to keep things confidential until they gathered enough evidence. For now, Officer Gregg remained unaware that his actions were being scrutinized. Life in the department continued as usual, or so it seemed. Behind closed doors, however, whispers began to spread. Officers noticed Laura acting differently. She was quieter, more withdrawn, and avoided small talk in the break room. Rumors started flying, with some speculating that she was under pressure or hiding something. Meanwhile, the young man found himself struggling to move past the incident. Even though he had done the right thing by reporting it, he couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability. Every time he saw a patrol car drive by, his chest tightened. He hated feeling this way, but he knew it was part of the process. What kept him going was the thought that maybe, just maybe, his courage could lead to real change, not just for him, but for others who had suffered silently. As the days passed, the tension in Crestwood Heights grew thicker. People in the department began taking sides. A few officers quietly supported Laura, believing that Officer Gregg had crossed a line and needed to be held accountable. They admired her bravery for coming forward, even though it put her in a difficult position. But many others rallied behind Officer Gregg, dismissing the allegations as exaggerated or fabricated. They argued that Laura's involvement made her biased, pointing fingers at her instead of addressing the core issue. Despite the growing divide, Laura refused to back down. She attended meetings, answered questions, and cooperated fully with the investigation. It wasn't easy. There were moments when she doubted herself, wondering if she was doing the right thing. But every time she felt like giving up, she remembered the recording. She remembered the fear in the young man's eyes and the anger in Officer Gregg's voice. Those memories reminded her why she had chosen this path in the first place. Back in the community, people were starting to notice something was off. While the details of the investigation remained under wraps, rumors trickled out. Some residents whispered about corruption in the police department, while others defended the officers, claiming they were being unfairly targeted. Tensions simmered beneath the surface, waiting for the right spark to ignite them. For now, Crestwood Heights appeared calm, but everyone could sense the storm brewing. The investigation was far from over, and its outcome would have ripple effects throughout the town. Would Officer Gregg face consequences for his actions? Could Laura navigate the backlash and restore faith in her leadership? And most importantly, would this incident serve as a turning point for the community, or would it deepen the divides already present? No one had the answers yet, but one thing was certain. The choices made in the coming weeks would shape the future of Crestwood Heights, and perhaps set a precedent for towns everywhere facing similar challenges. The investigation into Officer Gregg's actions quickly became the talk of Crestwood Heights. Internal affairs worked quietly at first, gathering evidence and interviewing witnesses without drawing too much attention. But as they dug deeper, patterns began to emerge. Patterns that painted a troubling picture not just of one officer, but of a system that had allowed misconduct to fester, unchecked, for years. At the heart of the case was the recording provided by the young man who had been handcuffed and threatened. It was undeniable proof of wrongdoing, capturing every slur, threat, and demand for money in chilling detail. But what shocked investigators even more were the files they uncovered during their review of past complaints against Officer Gregg. Over the years, several people had accused him of racial bias, excessive force, and intimidation. Yet none of those cases had ever led to disciplinary action. Some had been dismissed outright due to lack of evidence, while others were buried under layers of bureaucracy. As the pieces fell into place, it became clear that this wasn't an isolated incident. Officer Gregg had operated with near impunity, knowing that his behavior would likely go unpunished. What made matters worse was the realization that he wasn't alone. Conversations with other officers revealed a culture of silence within the Q department, a code where colleagues turned a blind eye to misconduct rather than risk rocking the boat. Word of the investigation spread like wildfire among the rank-and-file officers. At first, only a handful knew the specifics, but rumors quickly filled in the gaps. Whispers echoed through the hallways of the station. "They're looking into Gregg. Did you hear about the recording? What happens if they find something?" The atmosphere grew tense, with officers glancing over their shoulders and second-guessing their own actions. Trust, already fragile, began to erode further. For Chief Laura Reynolds, the pressure mounted daily. She tried to maintain her composure, attending meetings and overseeing operations as usual, but it was becoming harder to mask her exhaustion. Every decision she made was scrutinized, every move analyzed for hidden motives. Some officers questioned whether she had ulterior reasons for pushing the investigation forward. Was she trying to protect herself? Or was she using this as an opportunity to settle old scores? Despite the whispers and side-eye glances, Laura refused to let doubt creep in. She reminded herself why she had taken this step in the first place. Not for revenge, not for personal gain, but because it was the right thing to do. Still, there were moments when the weight of leadership felt unbearable. Late at night, sitting alone in her office, she replayed the events in her mind. She thought about the young man who had trusted her enough to come forward, the fear in his voice when he recounted the incident, and the courage it must have taken for him to press record. That thought kept her grounded. Meanwhile, Officer Gregg remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around him. He went about his duties as usual, cracking jokes in the locker room and patrolling the streets with the same swagger he'd always had. To him, this was just another complaint, one that would eventually fade away like all the others. He didn't realize how much things had changed. This time, there was concrete evidence. This time, the stakes were higher. Back in the community, the tension spilled out onto the streets. People started talking. Parents shared stories of run-ins with Officer Greg, recounting times when they or their children had been treated unfairly. Shopkeepers whispered about how he always seemed to linger longer in certain neighborhoods, targeting specific groups. Even those who hadn't directly encountered him felt uneasy, wondering if they might be next. Social media amplified the conversations, turning them into a chorus of voices demanding answers. Residents posted screenshots of old news articles, detailing previous allegations against Officer Greg. Someone created a hashtag, Justice for Crestwood. Within days, it was trending locally, sparking debates online and offline. Some argued that the entire police department needed an overhaul, while others defended the officers, claiming that a few bad apples shouldn't tarnish the reputation of the whole force. The growing unrest forced city officials to take notice. The mayor held an emergency meeting with top brass from the police department, including Chief Laura. They discussed ways to address the public's concerns without causing panic. Transparency was key, they agreed, but so was caution. Releasing too much information too soon could inflame tensions further. Instead, they decided to issue a carefully worded statement acknowledging the ongoing investigation and pledging full cooperation. But promises weren't enough for many residents. Protesters began gathering outside the police station, holding signs that read "Accountability now" and "No more excuses." Their numbers swelled each day, fueled by anger and frustration. Among them was the young man who had sparked the investigation. Though reluctant to step into the spotlight, he found strength in the support of those around him. For the first time since the incident, he felt less alone. Inside the station, morale plummeted. Officers who once prided themselves on serving their community now felt vilified. Some struggled to reconcile their sense of duty with the accusations being hurled at them. Others doubled down, blaming the protesters for stirring up trouble. Divisions widened, creating cracks in the unity that had once defined the department. Amidst the chaos, internal affairs continued their work, piecing together a timeline of events and building a case against Officer Greg. They interviewed colleagues, reviewed body cam footage, and cross-referenced statements. Each new discovery added another layer to the story, revealing just how deep-rooted the problem was. By the time they wrapped up their findings, they had amassed a mountain of evidence that left little room for doubt. Officer Greg's fate now rested in the hands of the review board. Would they recommend termination, criminal charges, or would they find a way to sweep everything under the rug, citing procedural errors or insufficient proof? The answer would determine not only his future, but also the future of the department, and perhaps the town itself. As Crestwood Heights held its breath, waiting for the verdict, one thing was clear: nothing would ever be the same again. The investigation had peeled back the curtain, exposing truths that many would have preferred to keep hidden. And while some feared what lay ahead, others saw it as an opportunity, a chance to rebuild trust, hold people accountable, and create a safer, fairer community for everyone. The storm that had been brewing in Crestwood Heights finally broke when someone leaked the explosive audio recording to a local journalist. Within hours, the clip went viral, spreading like wildfire across social media platforms and news outlets. The chilling voice of Officer Greg filled living rooms and phone screens, exposing his threats, racial slurs, and demands for money in stark detail. For many residents, it was the first time they heard undeniable proof of the misconduct that had long been whispered about but never confirmed. The fallout was immediate and intense. Protesters poured into the streets, their chants echoing through the town square. "No justice, no peace." Signs with slogans like "Expose the truth" and "Enough is enough" dotted the crowd. Parents brought their children, teachers walked out of classrooms, and even some retired officers joined the demonstrations, saying they couldn't stay silent any longer. The protests weren't just about Officer Greg. They were about years of frustration, fear, and mistrust toward law enforcement. For Chief Laura Reynolds, the public release of the recording felt like both a relief and a nightmare. On one hand, the truth was finally out there, impossible to ignore or sweep under the rug. But on the other hand, the spotlight now shone brightly on her as well. Reporters camped outside her office, demanding statements. Talk shows debated whether she should resign, given her personal connection to the victim. Critics accused her of bias, while supporters praised her courage for taking a stand. It was exhausting, overwhelming, and isolating all at once. Knowing she couldn't stay silent, Laura called a press conference. Standing behind a podium adorned with the department's emblem, she faced a sea of cameras and microphones. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the microphone, but her voice remained steady. She began by acknowledging the pain and anger rippling through the community. "What happened is unacceptable," she said, her eyes scanning the room. "Not only did an officer abuse his power, but he also betrayed the trust we've worked so hard to build." She admitted her personal stake in the case, explaining that the victim was someone close to her. Her admission drew gasps from the audience, but she didn't flinch. "Yes, this is personal for me," she continued. "But let me be clear, this isn't about my relationship. This is about holding ourselves accountable. If we don't address these issues head-on, we'll never move forward as a community." Her speech struck a chord with many. Some viewers applauded her honesty, calling her brave for putting herself in the line of fire. Others remained skeptical, accusing her of using the situation to protect herself. Online forums buzzed with heated debates dissecting every word she said. Regardless of where people stood, one thing was certain. Laura's decision to speak publicly had shifted the narrative. The focus was no longer solely on Officer Gregg. It was on the broader systemic problems plaguing the department. Meanwhile, the protests grew larger and louder. Residents organized marches, candlelight vigils, and town hall meetings to demand answers. At one such meeting, a young woman stood up to share her story. She recounted how Officer Gregg had pulled her over late one night, accusing her of driving recklessly despite having done nothing wrong. "He made me feel small, worthless, like I didn't belong in my own town," she said, her voice breaking. Her words resonated deeply with others in the room, prompting more people to come forward with their own experiences. These testimonies added fuel to the fire, amplifying calls for reform. A group of concerned citizens formed a coalition called Crestwood United for Change, dedicated to pushing for accountability and transparency within the police department. They drafted petitions, organized rallies, and lobbied city officials to take action. Their efforts gained traction quickly, drawing support from neighboring towns and even national advocacy groups. Amidst the chaos, Officer Gregg tried to defend himself. In a rambling interview with a sympathetic radio host, he claimed the recording had been taken out of context. "I was doing my job," he insisted, though his tone lacked conviction. When pressed about the racial slurs and extortion attempt, he stumbled over his words, offering excuses that sounded hollow even to his staunchest defenders. His attempts to paint himself as a victim fell flat, especially after more evidence surfaced linking him to past complaints of misconduct. As the pressure mounted, cracks began to form within the police department itself. Officers who had once defended Officer Gregg started distancing themselves from him, fearing guilt by association. Some openly criticized his behavior, while others quietly resigned, citing moral conflicts. Morale plummeted, leaving the force fractured and demoralized. Even those who hadn't been directly involved in the scandal found themselves questioning their roles in the system. Was turning a blind eye to misconduct complicity? Could they truly claim ignorance? City officials scrambled to respond to the growing unrest. The mayor held another emergency meeting, this time inviting leaders from the protest movement to participate. Tensions ran high as both sides aired their grievances, but the dialogue marked a crucial step toward bridging the divide. Together, they outlined a series of reforms aimed at rebuilding trust between law enforcement and the community. These included mandatory bias training, stricter oversight of officer conduct, and the creation of an independent review board to handle complaints. While these measures offered hope for change, skepticism lingered. Many residents wondered if the promises would amount to anything more than empty words. After all, similar pledges had been made in the past, only to fizzle out without meaningful follow-through. Still, others clung to optimism, believing that this moment represented a rare opportunity for real progress. For the young man at the center of the controversy, Life became a whirlwind of media attention and public scrutiny. He had never sought fame or recognition, but he understood the importance of his role in sparking change. With the support of activists and advocates, he used his platform to amplify voices often ignored by those in power. He spoke at rallies, met with lawmakers, and shared his story with anyone willing to listen. Though the experience left him emotionally drained, he found solace in knowing that his courage might help prevent others from enduring what he had. As the days turned into weeks, the momentum showed no signs of slowing down. The protests continued, the investigations deepened, and the conversations expanded beyond Crestwood Heights. What had started as a single incident involving one officer had ignited a nationwide discussion about racism, accountability, and the future of policing. For better or worse, Crestwood Heights had become a symbol, a test case for whether a community could confront its flaws and emerge stronger on the other side. And yet, uncertainty loomed large. Would Officer Gregg face consequences for his actions? Could Chief Laura navigate the backlash and lead her department toward reform? Most importantly, would the changes being proposed translate into tangible improvements, or would they fade away, like so many promises before them? The answers remained uncertain, but one thing was clear. Crestwood Heights was at a crossroads, and the choices made in the coming weeks would shape its destiny for years to come. The investigation into Officer Gregg's actions reached its climax, and the findings were damning. Internal Affairs presented a detailed report to the City Council and Chief Laura Reynolds, leaving no room for doubt about what had happened. The TOW recording, combined with witness testimonies, body cam footage, and years of ignored complaints, painted a clear picture. Officer Gregg had abused his power, acted out of prejudice, and attempted to extort money from an innocent person. Worse still, the evidence showed that his behavior wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern. When the news broke that Officer Gregg had been fired, reactions were mixed. Some residents celebrated, seeing it as a long overdue victory for justice. Others remained skeptical, wondering if firing one officer would truly fix the deeper issues within the police department. For Officer Gregg, however, this was far from the end of the road. Furious and humiliated, he lashed out publicly, accusing Chief Laura of orchestrating the entire ordeal to protect her secret relationship. He claimed she had used her position to target him unfairly, painting himself as the real victim in all of this. His accusation sparked yet another wave of controversy. Supporters of Officer Gregg rallied behind him, arguing that the investigation had been biased from the start. They pointed fingers at Laura, questioning whether her personal involvement compromised the integrity of the process. Meanwhile, critics dismissed his claims as desperate attempts to deflect responsibility. Social media erupted once again, with hashtags like "Fire the Racist Cop" and "More Protect Our Chief" trending side by side. The town of Crestwood Heights found itself divided, caught between those demanding accountability and those clinging to loyalty for one of their own. Adding fuel to the fire, Officer Gregg filed a lawsuit against the department, alleging wrongful termination and defamation. His legal team argued that the evidence against him was circumstantial and politically motivated, aiming to discredit the investigation entirely. This move dragged the case into the courts, prolonging the drama and keeping the spotlight firmly on Crestwood Heights. Lawyers, journalists, and activists descended on the town, turning it into a battleground for debates about race, policing, and systemic reform. For Chief Laura, the lawsuit felt like a punch to the gut. Just when she thought they were making progress, here came another hurdle threatening to undo everything. She spent countless hours preparing for depositions, reviewing documents, and consulting with attorneys. The stress took a toll on her physically and emotionally, but she refused to back down. "If we don't see this through," she told herself during late-night moments of doubt, "then what was all of this for?" Amidst the chaos, the City Council stepped up to address the growing unrest. Recognizing the need for systemic change, they approved a sweeping set of reforms aimed at rebuilding trust between law enforcement and the community. Mandatory bias training became mandatory for all officers, not just new recruits. Body cams were required to be turned on at all times during interactions with the public, and footage had to be reviewed regularly for accountability. Perhaps most Significantly, an independent review board was established to handle complaints against officers, ensuring that investigations were conducted fairly and transparently. These measures were met with cautious optimism. Residents appreciated the effort, but many wondered if the changes would stick or fade away like previous promises. To show their commitment, city officials invited members of the community to participate in shaping the reforms. Town hall meetings were held weekly, giving people a chance to voice their concerns and suggestions. Slowly but surely, the conversation shifted from anger and blame to collaboration and hope. Meanwhile, the young man at the center of the story continued to navigate life under the public eye. Though grateful for the support he received, he struggled with the weight of being seen as a symbol of resistance. Every interview request, every invitation to speak at rallies, reminded him of the night he wished he could forget. But he also understood the importance of his role. By sharing his experience, he hoped to inspire others to come forward and demand better, not just for themselves, but for future generations. One particularly powerful moment came when he addressed a packed auditorium during a community forum. Standing nervously at the podium, he spoke directly to the crowd. "I didn't ask for any of this," he admitted, his voice steady despite the nerves. "But I can't stay silent either. If my story helps even one person feel less afraid, then it's worth it." His words brought tears to the eyes of many in attendance, including Chief Laura, who sat quietly in the back row listening intently. As the weeks went by, the atmosphere in Crestwood Heights began to shift ever so slightly. Officers who had initially resisted the reforms started attending training sessions with open minds, realizing that change was inevitable and perhaps necessary. Community members, though still wary, began engaging with the department in ways they hadn't before. Joint initiatives, such as neighborhood patrols led by both officers and residents, helped bridge gaps and foster understanding. It wasn't perfect, and tensions still simmered beneath the surface, but there was a sense that healing might be possible. Even Officer Gregg's lawsuit couldn't overshadow the progress being made. Legal experts predicted it would take months, if not years, to resolve, giving the town time to focus on moving forward rather than dwelling on the past. In the meantime, the department worked tirelessly to implement the new policies, determined to prove that they were serious about change. For Chief Laura, the journey was far from over. She faced daily challenges, from managing internal pushback to addressing lingering distrust in the community. But she also saw glimmers of hope: officers volunteering for outreach programs, residents thanking her for listening, and young people expressing interest in joining the force with fresh perspectives. These small victories kept her going, reminding her why she had chosen this path in the first place. Crestwood Heights wasn't perfect, it likely never would be, but it had taken a crucial step toward becoming a better version of itself. The scars left by Officer Gregg's actions would take time to heal, but the town had proven that it was capable of confronting its flaws head-on. And while the road ahead remained uncertain, one truth stood firm: change was possible, but only if everyone worked together to make it happen. Months had passed since the scandal first rocked Crestwood Heights, and while the wounds were still raw, the town began to settle into a new rhythm. Officer Gregg's lawsuit dragged on in court, bogged down by legal technicalities and endless paperwork. But for most residents, the case felt like background noise now. What mattered more was the tangible progress happening right before their eyes. Officer Gregg himself had faded from view, retreating to a quiet life away from the spotlight. He occasionally appeared in interviews, ranting about how he'd been treated unfairly, but fewer people paid attention each time. The public had moved on, focusing instead on rebuilding trust and creating a safer community. For Chief Laura Reynolds, this shift was both a relief and a challenge. While she no longer faced constant attacks from critics, the pressure to maintain momentum weighed heavily on her shoulders. She knew that lasting change required consistency and patience. The reforms implemented by the City Council started showing results, albeit slowly. Mandatory bias training sessions became a regular part of the department's routine. At first, some officers rolled their eyes or grumbled under their breath, dismissing the workshops as pointless. But over time, attitudes began to shift. Many officers admitted they'd never fully understood the impact of their actions until hearing personal stories shared during these sessions. One officer recounted how a young woman spoke about being pulled over repeatedly for no reason, other than the color of her skin. Her voice trembled as she described feeling helpless and humiliated. That moment stuck with him, forcing him to reflect on his own behavior. Body cam footage also played a critical role in fostering accountability. Officers knew their interactions were being recorded, which encouraged them to act with greater professionalism. Residents noticed the difference too. Complaints about aggressive policing dropped significantly, replaced by positive feedback about respectful encounters. Even small gestures, like an officer taking a moment to explain why someone had been stopped, went a long way in restoring faith. Perhaps the most transformative change came from the Independent Review Board. Made up of diverse members from the community, the board reviewed complaints against officers impartially and transparently. Their decisions carried weight, ensuring that misconduct wasn't swept under the rug anymore. When one officer was suspended for using excessive force, word spread quickly, sending a clear message. No one was above the rules. For the young man whose courage had sparked it all, life gradually returned to normal, or at least as close to normal as possible. He continued advocating for reform, speaking at events and mentoring others who had experienced similar injustices. But he also made a conscious effort to step back from the limelight when needed, prioritizing his mental health and well-being. His relationship with Chief Laura remained strong, though it had changed. They leaned on each other through the toughest days, finding comfort in shared purpose and mutual respect. Their bond became a symbol of hope for many in Crestwood Heights. Here were two people from different worlds, brought together by circumstances neither could have predicted. Yet they chose to stand side by side, fighting for something bigger than themselves. It wasn't always easy. There were disagreements, moments of doubt, and sleepless nights. But they persevered because they believed in the possibility of a better future. The protests that once filled the streets evolved into community-building efforts. Instead of chanting slogans, residents gathered for block parties, cleanup drives, and youth mentorship programs. Officers joined in, playing basketball with kids or helping paint murals on abandoned buildings. These activities might have seemed small, but they created connections where none existed before. Trust wasn't built overnight, but every handshake, every conversation brought the town closer to healing. Of course, challenges remained. Not everyone embraced the changes willingly. Some officers resisted, clinging to old habits and resenting what they saw as unnecessary interference. A few even quit, claiming the job wasn't worth the hassle anymore. And while crime rates decreased overall, tensions occasionally flared, reminding everyone that progress was fragile. But despite these hurdles, there was a growing sense of optimism in Crestwood Heights. People talked openly about race, power, and accountability in ways they hadn't before. Conversations that once ended in arguments now led to understanding. Teachers incorporated lessons on justice and equality into their classrooms, inspiring the next generation to think critically about fairness. Local businesses displayed signs supporting reform, signaling solidarity with the movement. Even national media took notice, highlighting Crestwood Heights as a model for how communities could confront systemic issues head-on. Journalists interviewed residents, officers, and city officials, eager to learn what made this town different. The answer, they discovered, lay in its willingness to face uncomfortable truths and work collaboratively toward solutions. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that authenticity resonated deeply. As the months turned into a year, the scars of the past began to fade, replaced by fresh starts and renewed determination. Officer Gregg's lawsuit eventually fizzled out, dismissed due to lack of evidence supporting his claims. He disappeared from public view altogether, leaving behind only whispers of his name. Meanwhile, Chief Laura continued leading the department with integrity, earning respect not just locally but across the country. Looking back, the people of Crestwood Heights realized how far they'd come. What had started as a single incident involving one officer had ignited a revolution a reckoning with deep-rooted problems that couldn't be ignored any longer. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. Together, they proved that even the smallest voices could spark monumental change. And so, life in Crestwood Heights carried on. The sun rose each morning, casting light on streets that felt safer, kinder, and more united than ever before. Challenges would undoubtedly arise again, but the town now possessed something invaluable: resilience. They had faced their darkest hour and emerged stronger, ready to face whatever lay ahead, together.